Hello, my friends. Welcome to Storytime English. I am so glad you are here with me today. Find a comfortable spot, take a slow breath, and let the story begin. Now, imagine for a moment that you are sitting inside a very small house. The walls are made of rough logs cut from tree trunks. The floor beneath you is cold dirt. There are no windows. The wind comes through the gaps between the logs. Outside, it is winter. This is the frontier, the edge of the wild land, far from any city or town. Inside this small cabin, one fire burns, and beside that fire, a small boy sits. He is reading. He reads slowly. He reads carefully. He reads every single word. He does not have many books. In fact, he has almost none. But he believes, with his whole heart, that the words on these pages can take him somewhere better. His name was Abraham Lincoln, and those words did take him somewhere. They carried him from this small cabin to the most powerful position in all of America. Stay with me, my friend. This is his story. The year was 1809. On February the 12th, in a log cabin in the state of Kentucky, a boy was born. His name was Abraham. His father was Thomas Lincoln, a farmer. His mother was Nancy Hanks Lincoln, a quiet and gentle woman. The Lincoln family was very poor. They worked hard every day, but they had almost nothing, no money saved. No land they could truly call their own, no school within reach, and almost no books. When Abraham was 7 years old, the family moved. They packed everything they owned onto their horses and walked north through thick forest into the state of Indiana. Indiana at that time was wild and empty. The forests were dark and deep. There were no roads, no towns, and no neighbors for miles in every direction. This was the true frontier, the very edge of explored land. The young country of America was still being built here, slowly, by hand. Life on the frontier was hard, very hard. Abraham and his father cut down trees together and built a new cabin from nothing. They cleared the land and planted fields. The winters were long and cold. Some days there was very little food. The family lived on what they could grow, hunt, or find in the forest around them. But Abraham loved to read, and this was not easy. There were almost no books on the frontier. He borrowed books from neighbors who lived miles away through the forest. He walked for hours just to carry a book home. And at night, when the family had no candle, he read by the light of the fire, page after page, word after word. He read the Bible. He read stories. He read the histories of great men and great nations. He read slowly and carefully, and he remembered everything. His mother Nancy watched her serious, quiet son, and she was proud of him. But tragedy was coming. When Abraham was 9 years old, his mother Nancy became very ill. A sickness was moving across the frontier at that time. People called it milk sickness. It spread through the water and the plants of the land. It was very dangerous. Nancy grew weaker and weaker. And one morning in October of 1818, Nancy Hanks Lincoln died. She was 34 years old. Abraham was 9 years old. His sister Sarah was 11. Their father Thomas was broken by grief. They were alone in the wilderness, far from any family or help. That winter was one of the hardest and loneliest times of Abraham's childhood. The following year, Thomas Lincoln traveled back to Kentucky. He came home with a new wife, a widow named Sarah Bush Johnston. She had 3 children of her own. When she arrived at the cabin in Indiana, she looked at everything around her. The dirty, cold house, the quiet, sad children. She decided immediately that things needed to change. Sarah Bush Johnston was extraordinary. She was warm and strong and full of energy. She cleaned the cabin. She brought furniture and blankets and proper beds from her own home. She cooked good meals, and most importantly of all, she believed in Abraham. She saw something in this tall, serious boy with the calm gray eyes. She told him he was special. She encouraged him to read every book he could find. She made sure he attended school whenever one opened nearby. She treated him as her own son. Years later, when Lincoln was a powerful leader, he spoke about her with great love. He called her my angel mother. But the time for school was very short. In his entire childhood, Abraham Lincoln spent perhaps 18 months in a classroom. 18 months. That was all. Everything else, he taught himself. Think about that for a moment. 18 months of school, and yet this boy would go on to lead an entire nation. He read every book he could find. He borrowed. He walked miles through the forest. He stayed up late by the fire. He read Aesop's fables, the famous old stories of animals with lessons about life. He read Robinson Crusoe, the story of a man alone on an island. He read the Bible again and again. He read a history of the United States and learned the stories of the founding of his country. He practiced writing by drawing letters in the dirt with a stick. He wrote sentences on any piece of flat wood he could find. He memorized long passages from his favorite books. He repeated them quietly to himself while he worked in the fields. And deep inside him, something was growing. Not just knowledge, but a belief. A quiet and strong belief that a man could change his own life. That if he worked hard enough and learned enough, the future was still open. He was not finished. He was just beginning. When Abraham Lincoln was 21 years old, his family moved again, this time to Illinois. But Abraham was a young man now. He was ready to make his own way in the world. He said goodbye to his father and stepmother and went out on his own. He was very tall, 6 feet and 4 inches, which was unusual for that time. He was strong from years of heavy farm work. He was quiet and careful, but when he spoke, people listened. There was something honest and genuine about him. People trusted him without knowing quite why. He worked many different jobs in those early years. He worked on a boat that traveled down the great Mississippi River. He worked as a store clerk in a small town in Illinois called New Salem. He delivered the mail. He worked as a land surveyor, a person who measures the land and creates maps. He tried many things. He failed at some of them, but he kept moving. Through all of it, he read. And then one day, he found a book about the law. It explained the rules that governed the state of Illinois. He read it carefully. He read it again. He borrowed more law books. He studied them alone, late at night, by firelight, just as he had done as a child. People around him began to notice this tall, honest young man. He worked hard. He spoke clearly. He treated every person with respect. In 1834, at just 25 years old, he won a seat in the Illinois state government. His long journey into politics, the world of government and leadership had begun, and still, he kept studying law. In 1836, Abraham Lincoln became a lawyer. A lawyer is a person who studies the law and helps people in courts. A court is a place where a judge hears legal questions and makes decisions. He had no university degree. He had no teacher. He had taught himself completely. and he was good at it. He was very, very good. He moved to the city of Springfield, Illinois. He continued his law work. In 1842, he married a woman named Mary Todd. Mary was intelligent and educated and strong. They built a life together in Springfield and had 4 sons. It was not always an easy marriage. Abraham was often away for months at a time, working as a lawyer across the state. But Mary believed in him. She understood that he was meant for something large. And then, in the 1850s, something came that would bring Abraham Lincoln to the center of the nation's greatest crisis. For many years, one question had divided the United States more deeply than any other: the question of slavery. In the southern states of America, millions of men, women, and children were kept as slaves. They were owned by other people and forced to work with no pay, no freedom, and no rights. In the northern states, many people believed this was wrong and that slavery must end. In the southern states, powerful people wanted to keep the system exactly as it was. Lincoln believed that slavery was wrong. He said so clearly and bravely. He was not the loudest voice on this question, but he was honest, and people felt the truth in his words. In 1858, Lincoln ran for the United States Senate against a famous politician named Stephen Douglas. The two men held public debates in front of thousands of people. They argued about slavery and the future of the country. Lincoln did not win the Senate election, but his words traveled across the nation. People heard him. People read his speeches in their newspapers. People remembered him. Can you imagine that? This man had taught himself to read by firelight in a cold cabin. He had spent just 18 months in school. He had once been too poor to own a single candle. And now this same man was speaking to the nation about its future. In November of 1860, the people of the United States chose Abraham Lincoln as their 16th president. But the hardest years of his life were only beginning. Before Lincoln even became president, the country was already dividing. 7 southern states left the United States and formed a separate country. They called it the Confederate States of America. They did not accept Lincoln's election. They were afraid he would end slavery. In April of 1861, Confederate soldiers attacked a United States military fort in South Carolina. They called the fort Fort Sumter. The Civil War had begun. The Civil War was the darkest and most painful period in American history. It was a war between Americans, the northern states, against the southern states, brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor. Lincoln led the nation through 4 terrible years of fighting. He made decisions every day that determined the lives of thousands of soldiers. He received reports of battles and heavy losses. He visited wounded men in hospitals. He wrote personal letters to the families of men who had died. Think about that weight. Those letters. He wrote every one of them himself. He was not a perfect man. He made mistakes. Many people criticized him. Some days the burden was almost too heavy to carry. But Lincoln did not give up. He kept moving forward. And he kept believing that the country could survive. On January the 1st, 1863, Lincoln signed a document called the Emancipation Proclamation. Emancipation means freedom, freedom from slavery. This document declared that all enslaved people in the Confederate States were now free. It was not the complete end of slavery. That came 2 years later. The United States changed its constitution, its highest law, to free all enslaved people everywhere. But the Emancipation Proclamation was a turning point. It showed the world what the war was truly about. Not only keeping the country together, but freedom itself. In November of 1863, Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. He was there to speak at a ceremony for the soldiers who had died in a terrible battle. He stood before a great crowd and spoke for just 2 minutes. People later named this speech the Gettysburg Address. He began with these words: "Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal." You may not understand every word. A score means 20 years. So 7 means 87 years. But the meaning is simple. This country was built on the belief that all people are equal. Those words still echo today, more than 150 years later. Slowly, painfully, the war moved toward its end. The Confederate armies grew weaker. City after city fell to the Northern forces. 2. And on April the 9th, 1865, the Confederate commander, General Robert E. Lee, surrendered. The war was over. Lincoln was tired. He was deeply sad for all the men who had died on both sides. He did not want revenge. He wanted healing. He asked the nation to move forward together, with malice toward none. He said, "Malice means hatred." He was asking his people to move forward without hatred, without anger, with only the desire to heal. But Abraham Lincoln would not live to see that healing. 5 days after the war ended, on the evening of April 14th, 1865, Lincoln went to the theater in Washington. He sat with his wife in a box above the stage. The city was celebrating. People were laughing and cheering in the streets. The war was over. America was alive again. And then a man entered the theater box from behind and shot Abraham Lincoln. His name was John Wilkes Booth. He was full of hatred for everything Lincoln stood for. Men carried Lincoln to a house across the street. He never woke up again. He died the next morning, April the 15th, 1865. He was 56 years old. The whole nation went silent. The man who had carried the country through its worst years was gone. And so, my friends, the story of Abraham Lincoln comes quietly to its end. He was born on a dirt floor, in a cabin with no windows and almost no books. He lost his mother at 9 years old. He spent 18 months in school in his entire life. Everything he became, he built himself word by word, book by book, year by year. And when his country needed him most, he was there. He led it through its greatest darkness. He spoke for people who had no voice. He believed, until his very last breath, that every human being deserves to be free. Now, my friend, I want to say something to you. Abraham Lincoln learned to read by firelight in a cold cabin. He had no school, no teacher, no guide. He had only the light of the fire and the words on a page. And with those words, one careful sentence at a time, he changed the world. You are doing something very similar right now. Maybe you are learning English without a classroom. Maybe you are listening in a quiet room, late at night, or early in the morning, by yourself. Maybe some days the language feels far away. Maybe some days the words feel difficult and the horizon feels distant. But here you are. You are listening. You are learning. You are reaching just as Lincoln reached. Every word that becomes familiar to you, that is your fire. Every sentence that becomes a little clearer, that is your borrowed book. Every story you listen to from beginning to end, that is your step forward. Lincoln did not become great in one single day. He did it slowly, patiently, stubbornly. One word, one book, 1 year at a time. And so will you. Every story you listen to, every word you understand, that is a small victory. And that is something to be very proud of. Keep listening. Keep learning. And never stop moving forward. This is Storytime English. If Lincoln's story moved you today, please leave a comment. Tell me what surprised you most. Was it the firelight reading? The 18 months of school? Or the words he spoke at war's end? I would love to hear from you. There are many more stories waiting right here, and I will be here when you come back. Until next time, my friend, take care of yourself and never stop learning.